This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today I will be discussing the next film in Disney Week. This film is revolutionary in its visual style and has great music to accompany it. This week is all about Fantasia. So some technical details. Fantasia was originally just going to be the Sorcerer's Apprentice part of it, and it was going to be an animated short to reintroduce the audiences to Mickey Mouse, since he kind of declined in popularity at this time. So they came up with the idea of it, they started animating it, but the production costs kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so they decided to justify making such an expensive cartoon, they decided to expand it into a full-length feature. When they did so, they needed to hire over 1,000 artists and technicians to work on it, since it's very complicated visually, sound-wise, and many other instances. And although the film is considered a classic, it didn't make a whole lot of money when it premiered. And not because it isn't a good film or people didn't think it wasn't a good film. It was because it was expensive to distribute it, since they needed unique sound systems to make it the big roadshow that Walt Disney wanted out of it. And also, it was 2 hours and 4 minutes, which at that time was really, really long. So not many theaters were willing to buy into such a lengthy feature. So at the end of it, Disney lost money on it, despite it being really good. It's very interesting how it was nominated for a bunch of awards, and yet it hardly made any money. So those are some technical details I wanted to discuss about it. So let's get into the plot. Well, they even say at the beginning of it, there actually isn't a plot. But they do have 8 separate segments, and I'll go over each of those kind of briefly. So the first section is called Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And this is a short where it starts out with the musicians being led by Leopold Stokowski, and he's leading them playing the song, and then eventually it starts transitioning to where you just see the shadows of the musicians, and eventually it transforms into animation, and you see like waves moving to the beat of the music, some lines and crazy shapes, and then sometimes you'll see like the bows of the violinists coming out in the sky. It was pretty interesting. So that's the first part. The second part is the Nutcracker Suite, and typically you'll see this with like Christmas themes to it. But in this case, it just features flowers and fish dancing to the various sweets that are within the Nutcracker. There's like the Russian dance, the flowers that are looking like Russian dancers there's like an Arab dance, and the fish is kind of dancing like one of those Arabian belly dancers. So they kind of got it. It was interesting how they were able to use the flowers and the fish to kind of specify the different cultures that are represented in the Nutcracker Suite. Okay, and then the third part, the most famous part, is the Sorcerer's Apprentice cartoon, where Mickey Mouse, he's an apprentice of a sorcerer, as the title says, and his job is to carry buckets of water up and down the stairs and fill up this well inside his master's office, I guess, into his master's dungeon or cave, whatever it is. And Mickey was kind of tired of walking up and down the stairs, so he sees that his master left his hat on the table. So Mickey puts it on, and he starts using the magical powers, and he makes a broom come to life to pick up the buckets to go up and down and collect water. But unfortunately, he couldn't stop the the broom from doing it. He's very inexperienced with magic, and so eventually he just chopped up the broom to kill it, to stop it from doing it. And then Mickey, who's all tired now from chasing the broom and stopping him from doing it, falls asleep with the hat still on, and he has a dream of like controlling the cosmos, throwing stars around, when he wakes up, he realizes he brought the broom back to life with the little pieces of it, and it made hundreds of the broom carrying up buckets of water. And so he's just swirling around and he can't stop and all this chaos. And then his master comes down, kind of very mad at him, stops everything with his hands, using magic. And he takes the hat back, makes Mickey feel bad, and makes him clean up the water. So it's pretty entertaining. I think that's my favorite part in all of it. And it is the most famous part. So that's the third part. Now the fourth part is called The Rite of Spring. And this is one that's about the creation of the world. So it shows like the earth, how it's molting, and then there's volcanoes and lava creating the world. They do this to the beat of music. And I guess I should mention that there's hardly any dialogue at all throughout the film. There's just a master of ceremonies. His name is Deems Taylor. He was a famous composer. He describes each feature before it starts. Describes like the famous music they're using in it and how Disney adapted it and made it into something clever and funny. So the Rite of Spring, so the world is being organized. And then you see the first organisms. And over time it changes into the fish and then eventually into the dinosaur. And then you see this sequence of dinosaurs, living peacefully, eating plants. And then you see the Tyrannosaurus start chasing them and he kills a Stegosaurus, and pretty terrifying. And then it transitions to later on. This is one of the popular opinions, I guess, about dinosaur extinction. How there's a huge drought. And so all the dinosaurs are falling over dead. So it's dry, no water. And it ends with all of them as skeletons. Kind of how they got to where we know them today. So that's the fourth part. The fifth part, there's an intermission that they have. And you get to meet some of the musicians. And then Disney decided to make a character of the soundtrack. And it's just this line, and it reacts to the different instruments and different singers. So every time there's like a drum, it becomes these huge waves and fills the whole screen. It's very entertaining, and I think it's funny. And then the sixth part is the Pastoral Symphony, which was made by Beethoven. And it shows many Greek mythological creatures, such as centaurs and satyrs and Pegasus, as well as some of the Greek gods and goddesses. It just shows off the different creatures, how they're interacting with each other. And I think it was entertaining. I liked it. And it shows all of them interacting, and how Zeus, the Greek god, he starts throwing lightning bolts at them, kind of as sport, not really for any other reason. Then he gets bored of it. It's pretty interesting. So that's the sixth part. And then the seventh part, this is called The Dance of the Hours. This features ostriches and hippos as ballerinas, along with elephants and alligators as the male ballerina dancers. I'm not familiar with ballet, so I don't know any terms for it, but it was just very interesting to see the very skittish ostriches kind of delicately dancing around, and it was really, really funny. And then also seeing the hippos kind of trying to do the same thing, but, they're really big, so I thought that one was hilarious. That's the seventh part. Then the eighth part is called The Night on Bald Mountain and Ave Maria. So a demon, he awakes on top of a mountain, and he summons all the souls and spirits to the mountain he's on, called Bald Mountain. But all of them are brought back to their graves when the sound of church bells start to ring to kind of end this terror that the demon was starting. And then it cuts to some monks that are in the forest that are singing the song Ave Maria, and this kind of symbolizes how we could be delivered from hard times. And the film ends with the chorus singing Ave Maria, and it's rather beautiful and rather interesting, and I liked it. So that's the plot for Fantasia. I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first here's a message from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Okay, so we're back from our break, and now I want to get into some reviews of the film. So some critical reviews. Although it was praised amongst critics, it still fell flat financially, considering how I stated earlier how there were new technology that had to be updated and placed into theaters, and it was called Fantasound, and not a lot of them were financially ready to adapt something like that, and so it was really only limited to a few hundred some odd theaters, so it really limited the chances of people seeing it. And the fact that it was super long, in those days, it also hurt it. And RKO, which distributed Disney films at the time, they decided to cut it so that they could release it amongst the general population. So they missed out on about 40 minutes of it. And for many years, that was the case. The general audience only saw that shorter version of it. Until recently. Another thing, it has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. As I stated earlier, critics love this film. And although these are recent reviews, Rotten Tomatoes only came around in the 90s. But it is interesting to see how the shift of it went over the years. In the 60s and 70s, it kind of had a revival because a lot of college campuses would, show the film kind of as like a psychedelic feature. So the hippies really, really liked it. And I thought that was interesting. And Empire Magazine, which is a modern one that many of you probably know of, has given it a 2 out of 5, claiming that a majority of it is just nonsensical and insane, considering how there's no plot, no real storyline, so there's nothing really to follow. And so that's what critics mainly think of it. They're kind of divided, either you really, really like it or you don't get it at all. There's no in between. Definitely not a casual movie watcher type of film. Like the average movie watcher probably would like the some of the animated segments of it, but it can drag, and like I said, it's 2 hours long, so some people probably wouldn't be able to sit through that. So now let's get into my views of it. I really like the animation of it. I think it's very unique and very fascinating. I especially love it during the pastoral sequence and during the Sorcerer's Apprentice. The color schemes, the shadow, the shading, the lighting. Very, very unique and very, very professional. I love it art-wise. And I do agree with some people. I think it's too long. I mean, I don't think they should cut any segments out of it, but I definitely think some of them can be trimmed down a little bit. Especially like the Rite of Spring. The volcano sequence is really cool, but it goes on for a pretty long time. I don't know, maybe I just really like dinosaurs. I just want to get to the dinosaur part. Above all, though, I think the best thing about this film is the music. Timeless artists like Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, all of them being compiled and composed by Leopold Stokowski. I think the music really is the most powerful and amazing part of the film. I mean, the animation is up there too. Like I think they're both up there at the top, but definitely the music. I definitely think it's very well done in that sense. Okay, so those are my thoughts and views on Fantasia. I still recommend it, even though it's very long and some people might not like the length of it. I still recommend it. I think people should give it a fighting chance. Um, I haven't seen Fantasia 2000. From what I heard, it's not as good as this one, but it is more watchable, I guess. I guess it's not as long. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet, but I definitely recommend this one to people. You know, it's just I don't know what else to say. I think it's a good one, worth trying out. At least seeing it once. It's not one you'll need to go and watch again. I think it's one you could watch once and then be okay. And luckily with Disney Plus, it's free. Give it a shot. I think it's worth your time. All right. So, in light of the situation going on in the world and our country, I've decided to release a couple bonus episodes, both in honor of this being my 10th podcast, but also because I wanted to put them out there without any ads, so I won't be getting paid for them, but I just want to put them out there so you guys have more entertaining and fun things to listen to as you're either in quarantine or working from home. I wanted to share these with you guys. And so they'll be separate episodes. They'll come out on Tuesday and Wednesday. And so I hope you guys like it. There's some things that Hunter and I were discussing kind of before we recorded a few episodes. So we figure, as soon as we sit down to just start recording, and sometimes we'll talk and ramble about things that have nothing to do with the episode. So I figured to save it and make it into an episode for later on. So that's what I'm doing. Next time, I'm going to discuss the next studio for Studio Week. The first one was Universal. So this is a studio that has brought us classics such as Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Godfather trilogy, and films from great directors such as Alfred Hitchcock and Cecil B. DeMille. I'm, of course, speaking of Paramount Pictures. Until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care. Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/Surfing Through Cinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.